gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on.
Phase 2 of the administration's stabilization program is coming up to the 9-month mark. What is its record? To get the answer to this question, Cope Report talked with Nat Goldfinger, the AFL-CIO's top economist, and Leo Perlis, head of the AFL-CIO's price monitoring program. First, Cope Report asked Mr. Goldfinger for a general appraisal of the economy.
The state of the economy at this point, unfortunately, remains a mess, and it has been a mess for a number of years now. The administration's attempt to combat inflation, which began way back in January 1969 when it took office, has not been a success whatsoever. It remains an utter failure. And the evidence, I think, is pretty clear in the most recent report of the Labor Department on wholesale prices. Wholesale prices moved up 0.5% in the month of May. That's a yearly rate of 6%. Now, that's quite a jump in prices. This is a big rise in food prices. It's a big rise in industrial prices. Another way of looking at this is the administration has set up a target of a 2.5% price increase. That's their standard. And yet, consumer prices are moving up at about 4 or 5% at a yearly rate. Wholesale prices have been moving up at about the same kind of rate and faster. We're far off, very far off, from anything like the administration's price target of a 2.5% price increase. The administration's so-called new economic policy, just as the other game plan, which they started back in 1969, unfortunately for the American people, those plans have been one utter flop.
If price controls are a failure, Mr. Goldfinger, what about wage controls? Are they working?
The wage side of the administration's program is being kept relatively strong. Wage increases in general are very close to the administration's 5.5% guidepost, so that on the one hand you have wages being held down to about the administration's guideline of 5.5%. On the other hand, prices are far out of line with the administration's 2.5% price guideline. Productivity is going up, efficiency is going up, and the payoff here is pretty clear, and the payoff is going to profits. In the first quarter of 1972, we had one of the sharpest increases in profits in years, maybe going back decades. The increase in after-tax profits in the first quarter of 1972 was at a yearly rate of nearly 21%.
Who is being hurt the hardest by wage controls?
The administration cracks the whip on workers, frequently low-wage workers. You have the case of laundry workers in the city of Pittsburgh, whose average hourly earnings are $1.94 an hour. They negotiated a wage increase with their employers. They were turned down by the pay board. Also, right here in the city of Washington, the President's Cost of Living Council has rejected the District of Columbia's city government increase in the minimum wage for restaurant and hotel workers. Now, these are shameful acts directed against low-wage workers at a time when the big corporations are getting away with huge increases in profits.
Back to prices. Mr. Perlis, are the American people satisfied with the price control program?
The American people seem to have no confidence in the price control program. The Lou Harris poll showed that about 82% of the American people either feel that prices are higher now than they were a year ago or about the same as a year ago. The Gallup poll a couple of months ago showed that the American people are dissatisfied with the price control system. So there's a great credibility gap between the American people and the administration. Number two, the American people feel the price control are not equitable simply because it does not provide the kind of equity for the poor, the working people, and the unemployed as it does for the bankers and the industrialists and the rich. Number three, there are no price controls really on many items. Many items are simply uncontrolled. They're exempt. There have been more exemptions given in the past few weeks As you know, all business units employing 60 employees and less are now exempt of all price controls. And many of them are exempt also of pay controls, except those that are covered by master agreements, and they are exempt only from price controls but not from pay control. Now, where is the equity in that?
Well, gentlemen, what kind of price control program do you want? The administration says that workers are benefiting from controls by higher disposable income.
If we're going to have controls, let's have genuine controls, and let's have fair and equitable controls instead of a phony kind of setup. And what we have now is a phony setup. We have a price control mechanism which isn't effective in the first place because there isn't enough machinery out there. There isn't enough staff to enforce it. And you don't have a system where the average consumer can understand what the price control setup is, unless he's an accountant or some kind of expert. All the consumer knows is a quite obvious thing, is that from week to week and month to month, the same amount of money at a supermarket buys less and less. I mean, there's clear evidence of inflation. So that I would say that if we're going to have this kind of control setup, let's have an effective control setup. And let's have it across the board, instead of this kind of setup which is a sham at this point and utter phony. Some parts of the economy have no price controls at all. 3/4 of the retail stores have no price control. Nearly half the rental units in the United States have no rent control. Other parts of the economy are supposed to be under control, but there's no machinery to enforce the controls. Furthermore, the Price Commission itself has all kinds of rules which benefit the big corporations, and they permit the big corporations to get away with fairly substantial price increases. And they have all kinds of fancy names and titles for it, like TLP and other kinds of things. But without getting into that gobbledygook, it adds up to price increases. And once again, you can see this at the end of the road, and the end of the road is when you go to a store as a consumer and you look at the price tag, and it's the price tag that counts.
Retail prices are going up. The Wharton School of Finance of the University of Pennsylvania recently issued a statement that they expect an inflationary rate of something like 3.6 by the end of the year, which is about 1% higher than what the government would accept as a figure, say from 2 to 3% acceptable rate of inflation per year. A lot of other economists feel that the inflationary rate will probably be something like 4.1. Now, I'm not familiar with the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics has arrived at the figure of disposable income. But where is the disposable income among the 5 million unemployed? Where is the disposable income of the millions of people, 12 million people or so, on public assistance? What about the disposable income of the poor and the marginal worker in the low industry? It is easy to take an average figure and put it right across the board and say, well, this is the disposable income. But I would guess that millions of people in this country simply have not achieved that kind of disposable income.
Mr. Perlis, what happened to the complaints filed with the Internal Revenue Service by AFL-CIO price monitors?
The violations that we filed with the Internal Revenue Service were not really investigated too thoroughly. The IRS has been non-responsive to many of the complaints filed with them. On the other hand, it became almost impossible to determine which is a violation and which is a legally justified price increase according to the Price Commission, so that the average consumer and the average monitor found it impossible, really, to determine violations as such. But we have continued to check on the total cost of living, which we initiated a number of months ago, because we have been concerned with the total cost of living and not only those items which were covered by the Price Commission controls. And many of our monitors, thousands of our monitors, are still going into stores, still checking prices. And we have now initiated again a 3-month study of 20 communities. Incidentally, the same communities which we studied from January 3 to April 3 on a bi-weekly basis. We're now doing the same 20 communities from June 15th through September 15th. And our monitors are checking the same items in the same stores in the same cities. And we'll have a pretty good comparison as to how the prices are going up in these communities as compared not only with the 3-month period from January 3 to April 3, but also against the base period of August 1971. Now, we are beginning to find out already in a spot check the prices are going up on many items, both exempt and non-exempt, and that at least in a spot check in 4 supermarkets here in Washington, a number of meat items are not even available anymore.
Mr. Perlis, if you could make one suggestion to improve the price control program, what would it be?
I think that the American consumer, on his own and through his own organizations, ought to have the authority and the right to look at the price control records, which are shrouded in secrecy. There's no reason why the average consumer ought not to be heard, ought not to be heard in more open hearings, ought not to see the records available to the Price Commission so that he can determine for himself whether price increases are actually justified. The whole Phase 2 enforcement program, which is not familiar to the American people, has been a fiasco. As you may know, there are some things since Phase 1, 145,000 complaints have been filed with the Internal Revenue Service. 145,000 according to the IRS, and yet there has been only 1 conviction as of June 9. And it is my guess that for every complaint filed with the IRS, there must have been at least 10 or more that remain unfiled. People simply pay more and they say, well, they gripe about it and they forget about it. And the fact that only 1 conviction and only 4 criminal indictments made by the Justice Department, all on rents, in the face of 145,000 official complaints filed with the IRS. There's something wrong there.
Aren't consumers supposed to get refunds for overcharges?
We don't know of a single customer who has received restitution for overcharges. And we checked with the IRS and with the Price Commission, and they have no figures on that. We checked with many of our monitors across the country to find out whether they know of a single consumer who has received restitution for overcharge, and they don't know of a single one.
We haven't talked much about unemployment. Mr. Goldfinger, how many American workers are unemployed?
For the past 19 months, ever since November 1970, unemployment has remained in the neighborhood of about 5 million, or about 6% of the civilian labor force. Now, in the past number of months, the economy has moved forward to some degree. Production has increased, sales have increased. However, when you look at the record, sales and production have not increased enough to produce the number of jobs that are needed for a growing labor force in a period of rising productivity. There has been some increase in employment as well, but we have a very rapidly growing labor force. There are more and more people in the labor force and more people coming into the labor force looking for work. For example, in this period of time, the normal growth of the labor force on the basis of population trends is about 1.5 million a year. On top of that, we have additional hundreds of thousands of Vietnam veterans who are adding to the growth of the labor force as they return from the military. In addition to that, we have well over 1 million people who are not even counted in the labor force figures and not counted as unemployed any longer because they've been discouraged and they moved out of the labor force. They stopped looking for work.
How can this unemployment rate be corrected?
We have to create about 2 million new jobs in the next 12 months, merely to keep unemployment where it is now, merely to prevent a rise in unemployment. In order to begin to make a dent in the present high level of unemployment, you need about 2.5 to 3 million new jobs created in the next 12 months, and then you'd need the same kind of thing all over again in the following 12 months. We would need at least 2 years of very rapid job creation to begin to approach something like full employment.
One bright spot in the controls program for workers occurred after this interview took place. A U.S. District Court judge in Washington, D.C., threw out the Cost of Living Council's ruling exempting only workers earning less than $1.90 an hour from wage controls. The judge, agreeing with the AFL-CIO position, said the $1.90 rule was too low and ordered the government to stop enforcing it. For up-to-the-minute news about the AFL-CIO's position in the 1972 election, please turn to Side 2 of this cassette.
We're gonna roll the Union on.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
AFL-CIO President George Meany called a special session of the Federation's Executive Council to consider its position on the 1972 election. Cope Report's microphones were there when President Meany told a press conference of the Council's decision.
I can assure you the press conference won't be long. We had a very fine meeting, one of the finest meetings I think I've ever attended. Practically every member of the AFL-CIO Executive Council was present, discussed this matter very fully, without any loud talk, very calmly, and they considered it from a trade union point of view and from no other point of view. And the decision of the Council is very short, and I will read it to you right now. Under the circumstances, the AFL-CIO will refrain from endorsing either candidate for the office of President of the United States. These circumstances call rather for the maximum concentration of effort upon the election of senators and representatives whose records commend them to the working people of America. Affiliates are, of course, free to endorse and support any candidate of their choice. That's the action of the Executive Council, and that's the whole bit.
The National Press Club in April, you said that at that time you had nothing against Senator McGovern. What do you have against him at this time?
The Council took its action, and it's quite obvious from the Council's action that they're not in favor of endorsing either candidate, and that is my position. I'm not going to do any campaigning for anyone or any election here this morning. This decision of the Council was by a vote of 27-3, so it's an overwhelming vote, and that is the decision. We are going to work as hard as we can to elect our friends on Capitol Hill. Our individual unions are free to endorse and most likely will endorse, and under our setup and under our Constitution, they're absolutely free to do that.
By not endorsing the Democratic slate, as I believe your organization has done since 1956, doesn't this, in fact, help Richard Nixon?
Yes, and by not endorsing Richard Nixon, this does, in fact, help George McGovern.
You're even-handed, you believe. The effect
I am very even-handed.
We know the objections to Mr. Nixon, but could you detail your objections to Mr.
I
McGovern?
sure could, but I'm sure not going to at this time. I'll try at some time to give them both equal time.
In view of the fact that the position taken by the Executive Council seems very obvious from a trade union point of view, why did you feel necessary to convene a special Executive Council meeting at this time and not wait for the general board
Did you
meeting?
witness the Democratic convention? At the end of that convention, I felt I had to get our people together and find out what was what.
Why so?
Why so? Because this is the business of the trade union movement, to take a position, and we've taken a position.
What was the vote upstairs?
27-3.
Who were the three who voted against it?
Worth, Grossman, and Jennings.
Who's that?
Jerry Worth, Al Grossman, Paul Jennings.
Is the general board meeting off for August?
There is no general board meeting.
Who was the third man?
Jennings.
There is no general board meeting?
There is no general board meeting, no.
Mr. Meany, do you see a good
There'll be a council meeting in August.
Do you see a good deal of difficulty for Democrats on the Hill in November?
Well, I think you better talk to some of the Democrats. I hear all sorts of messages that they are in great difficulty. I don't know. They'll have to speak for themselves.
Does this mean that Cope will not provide any...
This means that Cope will work like the devil for the candidates in the House and the Senate that we want to try to help to elect.
Does this indicate that you see no difference between Richard Nixon and George McGovern as far as the trade
union movement is concerned?
When I get down to analyzing this thing at some future date, I'll answer that one. I don't want to answer it
Mr.
now.
Meany, are you for Richard Nixon, retention
I
of Richard
am.
Nixon in the White House?
Let me give you my position, John. I will not endorse, I will not support, and I will not vote for Richard Nixon for President of the United States. I will not endorse, I will not support, and I will not vote for George McGovern for President of the United States. If old Norman Thomas was only alive.
You say you never voted for Norman Thomas when he
Oh,
wasn't.
no, we had a fellow named Roosevelt around in those days.
There was some talk in Miami about a possibility of a Labor Party as an alternative to the AFL-CIO. Was that discussed today?
No, it was mentioned, but it wouldn't be fair to say it was discussed. Let me say this. The position of Labor over the years on the Labor Party has been very simple. That we didn't want to expend all of our energy running a Labor Party, trying to run the country, when we were able to bring to the workers of America, despite our dissatisfaction with conditions, a better condition than workers have in any other part of the world. If we get to the point that we can no longer bring those benefits to the workers of America under the present two-party system, you can bet your life we'll seriously consider a Labor Party.
Mr. Meany, have you discussed this with Senator McGovern? Has he talked to you or Senator Eagle?
No. I haven't talked to President Nixon either.
Would you tell us why you think this is better for the trade union movement?
Well, I'll tell you very, very simply why it's better for the trade union movement. It's quite obvious. There is a division among the rank and file of our organization, and rather than try to solve that division at the top, we're giving them a job on which they can agree and let them do as they like on the presidential candidate. We're giving them a job to try to get Labor's friends back on Capitol Hill. And I'm sure there's no disagreement on that.
A reporter in the back of the room asked if endorsements of Senator McGovern by affiliated unions will weaken the leadership of the AFL-CIO.
You better ask the leaders of the AFL-CIO. Don't ask me that one.
Mr. Meany, will this leave the state federations free to take any action?
No. State federations have to follow AFL-CIO policy.
All state federations?
All state federations, all city central bodies. They are directly chartered under direct supervision. They must follow the policy of the Executive Council. The international unions are free to take any policy they like.
A year ago, you said that the paramount issue in this election would be dumping Richard Nixon. Why is that no longer paramount for Labor?
Because a man by the name of George McGovern got the Democratic nomination.
What's wrong with that, sir?
I don't know. You figure it out.
The council and you made the decision, so what's wrong with that?
Well, we don't think it's good for Labor.
Why isn't it good for Labor?
Because we don't think that this man is good material.
The machinists think otherwise.
Of course they think otherwise. They got a right to think otherwise.
Well, what about their thinking?
Well, their president was at the meeting today, and he made his position quite clear. His organization is endorsing McGovern, and he endorsed wholeheartedly the position that I just read to you of the AFL-CIO.
Mr. Meany, are you trying to guarantee the defeat of Senator McGovern so you can pick up the pieces afterwards, the pieces of the party?
No, I have no interest in that. My interest would be if there was some way to defeat both of them. I don't know how that can be done, but...
For whom will you vote?
I will not vote for either one. You just heard me say that. You know, certain rights you have, and you have a right not to vote. It's not a good thing. We don't recommend it. But I'm going to vote for all other people on the ticket. I'll vote for whoever I see fit.
Your rank and file to not vote for either one of them?
No, we're not urging our rank and file to do anything, as far as that goes. The idea that we control the rank and file vote is absolutely ridiculous, and I've said this for 40 years. We don't control any votes.
One of these men presumably will be elected, Nixon or McGovern. Surely they aren't exactly even as far as Labor is concerned.
They're pretty even as far as I'm concerned.
Well, which would be the worst one from your standpoint to be elected?
I don't care to answer that because I'm not going to vote for either one.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
To recap the position of the AFL-CIO, the Federation will make no endorsement for President of the United States. Instead, it will concentrate its effort on the election of senators and congressmen with good records as far as workers are concerned. Affiliated unions, however, are free to endorse and support the presidential candidate of their choice. State and local central bodies, which are chartered arms of the AFL-CIO, must follow the AFL-CIO policy and cannot make any endorsements for president. Next month, More up-to-the-minute reports of politics, legislation, and the economy on Cope Report.
Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?